Out of focus on world DNA today, US President Donald Trump says negotiations with Iran will resume on Monday.
Well, the apparent de-escalation between Iran and the US follows days of threats of new attacks from each side. With this, oil prices fell on Monday after Trump announced that the new negotiations would take place. And Trump's latest claim also came a day after he said he had called off a planned attack to pursue a deal to halt Iran's nuclear ambitions and also to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The president claimed he was asked by Iran as well as partners Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar to hold off the strikes.
It was going to be a massive attack. It was going to be attacked, but would have been by far the biggest attack since World War II. But they've asked us not to do it. They said, please don't do it. And their neighbors said that too. And so we're just going to see whether or not we can make a deal for the denuclearization.
Iranian state media has denied that Tehran asked for the attacks to be called off or has changed its stance on the waterway. But an Iranian lawmaker said that mediators were seeking to revive a deal that briefly halted the war in June.
Hassan Ghashkawi, who's the spokesperson for Parliament's National Security Commission, said there is an effort underway to revive the 14-point agreement by the mediators.
Iran has said it is nearing a deal with Oman over a new route through the strait, but it has also insisted that such an agreement did not mean the reopening of the strait. Iran's foreign ministry also underlined that the Strait of Hormuz will in no way return to the status it was before February 28, the date that the war began.
Well, with this, maritime trade tracking data shows traffic through Hormuz Strait has dropped significantly. U.S. Central Command said that it has redirected 35 as many as 35 commercial vessels, disabled 2 and boarded 2 since the renewed U.S. naval blockade of Iran took effect. That was on 14th of July.
Now, according to the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, a tanker off the coast of Oman reported hearing an explosion near the vessel on Sunday. But the vessel and the crew members, they were all safe. To discuss more, we are now being joined live by military expert Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis from Sterling, Virginia. Welcome to the broadcast, Lieutenant. We know President Trump says he called off major strikes, and this at the request of what he calls the 3 primary groups. And he's referring to Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar, the same Saudi Arabia that still refuses to normalize ties with Israel without a path to Palestinian statehood. So what should we look at? Is Washington now listening to its Arab partners even more than Israel?
Well, it certainly was on this case, and rightfully so, because Israel was not going to be hit in a retaliation if President Trump had gone through with his strike as big as what he claimed it was in that soundbite you just showed, which he said was going to hit energy infrastructure, electric power generation, maybe even knocked out all the power for Iran. That's one of the objectives that was listed as a possibility. Of course, oil facilities, etc. Stuff that Iran said, if you attack, we will immediately fire back at all the GCC countries. Everybody who has been on your ally on this side, we will strike back and hit the same type of targets. And they put out a target list earlier this week where they talked about exactly which facilities in which countries that they would hit, some of which were Saudi Aramco, which were some of their most vital reprocessing and oil production facilities that they have. And if those things get hit and destroyed, it could literally set them back years to try and recover to the pre-war norms. And so the Saudi Arabians are saying, don't do this, because look, there was no possibility that even hitting Iran that hard was going to cause them to collapse. It was going to cause their government to surrender. It was going to open the Strait of Hormuz. It would have done none of those things, but it would have added more pain and harm to our allies in the region. And I think that they really put a lot of pressure on President Trump not to do that, because it couldn't help, but it would hurt a lot. And in that same interview that you showed a bit of right there, he even acknowledged that there could be, second and third order effects or unintended consequences, and it would harm people. So it seems that that message did get through.
Yes, sir, point taken. And in fact, in continuation with the point you mentioned regarding Strait of Hormuz, do you think Trump has probably realized that all of this is a lost cause now? There have been pressure points. In your opinion, what have been those sticking points that pushed President Trump to the negotiating table, whether it's the global supply disruption, the Strait of Hormuz, or even the pressure that he has been facing from the GCC countries, and of course, not to forget the November midterm elections?
Yeah, going back to the 2-month blockade, I think President Trump listened to some of his advisors who said, hey, maybe a blockade will cause so much pressure and pain on the Iranian side that they'll capitulate and they'll give in. So he said, well, let's give that a try. Took a couple of months. It kept the strait closed, but it didn't cause any specific military damage to any of our allies in the region. Gave us a chance to rearm, recuperate some of our military facilities, etc., bring more ammunition into theater. Then came the signing of the MOU because President Trump recognized, all right, the 2 months of the blockade is not going to work. It's going to hurt us more than it's going to hurt Iran. So on June 17th, he signed that, and he made the comment at the time that he realized that our strategic petroleum reserve was running low and that he didn't want to be President Hoover administering over a depression, national or global depression. He realized what was at risk. But then it seems he kind of forgot that, or else he allowed somebody to talk into his ear and tell him, no, more military power will work. And then they tried that 13-day consecutive strikes. That didn't accomplish anything. And then now he had to come to the grips that either you had to escalate further and go in an even bigger path, or he's going to have to just agree to some kind of negotiated term. And he didn't want to do that because that would make him look bad. But now then we see, I think, that if the message is getting through that it's not going to work, and I can tell you for certain that members of the military, members of the intelligence community, and other even members of his administration were all telling him this would not work. Don't try it because it will harm us even more. Now that's worked for this weekend, but whether that's going to work next weekend, who knows? Because we've been through this, in and out kind of situation for a while now.
Lieutenant David, speaking of diplomacy, Pakistan positioned itself as a mediator earlier this year, and now there's no mention of the country anywhere. So do you think the country has been sidelined, or was its role never central to begin with?
Well, I certainly think that it was when it came to the MOU. I mean, they were central to that. They were, one of the biggest mediators for it. But I think that this transcends any kind of a mediated effort. I mean, you see our direct ally, Saudi Arabia, is basically pleading with President Trump not to go further with the attacks. And so at this point, because there's no negotiations going on, so there's really no role for Pakistan or Oman or anybody else like that to play in terms of between the United States and Iran. Because the ceasefire is over, according to President Trump. There are no negotiations, according to the Iranian side, so there's nothing to mediate right now. We have to hope we can get back into a mediating situation so that somebody like Pakistan can actually play a role.
Yes. So, point taken. Just last question before we let you go. Reports suggest that the military arsenal of US has been depleting. Talking about that vis-a-vis the kind of support that Iran has been receiving from Russia with respect to the intel inputs and from China now, it's said that China is going to be providing Iran with missiles. Do you think those are also the pressure points that probably pushed President Trump to the negotiating table?
It's a combination of all that. I've seen a lot of the press reports. There's evidence that Iran is targeting intelligence, whether from China or from Russia, who can say, but it's something that's different from what it was earlier in the war, much more effective, much more timely, to where they can get targets of opportunity and have ordnance on target when things are moving. That almost certainly is either a Russia or a China, or who knows, maybe both. That combined with, you had the U.S. European Command General Grinkowicz this past week, a report from the Washington Post was leaked that said he told the president, hey, I don't have enough naval forces right now to actually even defend both U.S. and Israeli interest in the Middle East. I need another destroyer, I believe it was. That's about a few days after we had reports that the vice president and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff were telling President Trump we don't have enough interceptor missiles or offensive missiles to continue this much further. And by the way, those aren't going to work to make Iran give in. So there's no point in expending them. And I think all that together finally got through to President Trump. But the thing is, all that was true on Friday when he was ready to unleash all this holy hell, as some were calling it. So again, we don't know what that's going to do after, more people come back to this week. So next weekend, we could be right back in this same dangerous spot.
Yes, point taken, sir. And of course, remains to be seen whether we see any headway or not, or whether the negotiations will again fall flat, that is, as we've seen all this while. But appreciate you speaking to WION.
Always my pleasure.